Thank you, Keith. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our fourth conference talk. Our speaker today is Stephen Hoare, who's an established writer and journalist. And his recent subject is the history of the West End in London. His first book, Palaces of Power, published by the History Press, is now out in paperback. This examined the growth and development of London's clubland from the 17th century to the present day. His latest book is Piccadilly, London's West End and the Pursuit of Pleasure. And this brings the bright young things centre stage. And both books describe the real life gentlemen's clubs and rather louche night haunts, which were reimagined, of course, in AP's Dance to the Music of Time. Stephen's talk today is entitled Anthony Powell and the Travellers Club. And I'll hand over to Stephen so he can screen share and take us through his slides and his talk. Over to you, Stephen.
Very good. Okay. Anthony Powell was first mentioned as a candidate for the Travellers Club in 1926 when, with his address and occupation being given as Balliol College and undergraduate. The candidature was proposed by the college dean, Mr. F.F. Urquhart, otherwise known as the celebrated Bigger. Powell's name appears alongside his friend and fellow Etonian Henry Yorke, who wrote novels under the name Henry Green. Yorke must have been a very popular lad because he had about a dozen seconders. Anthony Powell only had one seconder, but it's very significant that Sligger or Sillery, as we might call him in the Dance the Music of Time, should have chosen Powell as an undergraduate member of the Travellers Club, because in those days, I have to remember that 1926 was more or less after the Great War. Clubland was really on its knees. It was, the membership had not recovered from the huge loss of life in the trenches. Clubs were offering cut price membership, and as a member of the Travellers, Professor Urquhart was, I suppose he must have received a bounty, or at least he was very keen to enroll people in the Travellers. And here we are. And I call it an acceptance world because Anthony Powell, clubs would have really, really suited him. And it was like, you are a grown-up, you are an adult, and we have selected you as a member of this Travellers Club. Now, you could argue, well, the Travellers, was it the most suitable club for Anthony Powell? But as my talk will show you, yes, it really was a very, very suitable club for him. Now, you all know this quote from Dance. I forget which book it actually comes up in, but I think that Nick Jenkins is standing at the coffee, the canteen, the sort of coffee bar at Hyde Park Corner in his evening dress. He's just been to a ball, and he encounters his friend Charles, the Honourable Charles Stringham. Says, "How come everybody seems to know everybody else?" That's just the way it is, Nick. And you will see that there were quite a lot of people in the Travellers who did indeed know everybody else. Besides Henry Yorke, the novelist, a member, Alan Price Jones was elected in 1930, as was Powell's friend, the artist Adrian Daintree, whose self-portrait you can see on the left. Eton and Balliol were very, very well represented in the membership of the Travellers, because Powell's school friend, Etonian Lord Billy Clonmore was elected, Harold Nicholson, John Betjeman, and it's what Patrick Leigh Fermor, who wasn't elected until just after perhaps the very end of the Second World War. He called those that first intake, if you like, the interwar years, a gilded Valhalla, or no, Valhalla of gilded youth. The 1932 intake included Frank Pakenham, Lord Longford, as he became, and the traveller and explorer Wilfrid Thesiger, and the aesthete Kenneth Clark, who was of civilization fame and director of the National Gallery. So what was this club that Powell joined? Okay. The Travellers Club was founded on the 18th of August, 1819, by this fellow on the left, Lord Castlereagh, Foreign Secretary under Lord Liverpool's government. The aim was to cement the post-Napoleonic world order in Europe, where Britain had an important diplomatic role to play in rebuilding nations which had been ravaged by Napoleon. In Castlereagh's words, the club was intended for soldiers, civilians, and as a place where men could meet socially with other travelers, visiting foreigners of distinction and diplomats. And it was a very important, the club was a very important tool in foreign policy, because I suppose in those days the British government was perhaps as chaotic as it is today, but the club was vastly enhanced in terms of status, and the Duke of Wellington had been instrumental in forming the club. He certainly gave it his assent. And the club was a place where you could host dinners for visiting diplomats, where people could meet on neutral ground as a sort of, it's a sort of an important reception area. You know, it's not, it doesn't have the status of a government visit, but very important diplomats can be quietly wined and dined discreetly. Anyway, the Travellers Club was designed as by Charles Barry, the architect who went on to design the Houses of Parliament, as an Italianate palazzo. It was very much in the style of Renaissance architecture, beautifully laid out, very impressive reception rooms. And the founder members were men of taste. This is an original ballot box. You had to be elected. One of the rules was that you would have, to apply, members had to prove that they had travelled 500 miles from London by land, not by sea, because otherwise that could include convicts being shipped to Botany Bay. But it does, the 500-mile condition was took in career soldiers, it took in diplomats, ambassadors, governors of faraway parts of the British Empire, merchants, all kinds of, and also men who had been on the grand tour. So there was a sort of a classical background to all this, and it was a sort of it wasn't particularly either Whig or Tory. I mean, there are clubs that are very much one or the other, but the first the club's committee was formed under the chairmanship of Lord Auckland, the Earl of Aberdeen, William Ligon, Earl of Beauchamp, Lord Ancram, Marquis of Lansdowne, Lord Palmerston, also the archaeologist C.R. Cockerell, who was excavating a lot of Greek ruins at the time, and I think we'll see how that influenced the style of the club, because it was very much in the classical Grecian style. Now, as I say, the club was had the support of the Duke of Wellington, and it's very interesting that Duke of Wellington, although he was a military leader, he was also responsible for laying the foundations of the new clubland in Pall Mall. This is as opposed to the old St. James's clubland with White's, Brookses, Boodles, clubs like that, which were essentially gambling clubs, gambling casinos for the super rich. The Duke of Wellington had a much higher purpose in supporting clubs, and you'll find actually the Duke of Wellington was a member of about, I think roughly by my calculation, about 9 clubs, starting with the Union Club in 1805 to celebrate the Union, Britain's union with Ireland, and the influx of Irish MPs, the sort of combination of the Irish aristocracy and the Irish Parliament. Wellington was also a member of the United Services Club, which is now the Institute of Directors. The United Services Club was for Waterloo veterans, senior officers of both services. He was a founder member of the East India Club, because Duke of Wellington and his brother, of course, his brother was the governor of India under the East India Company. And of course, Wellington cut his teeth in India as a general, winning many of those famous campaigns which subdued the Indian subcontinent and really added India, or amalgamated it in what became later the British Empire. Wellington was also a member of the Carlton Club for Tories, and also the Oxford and Cambridge Club, where he was a chancellor, I think, of King's College and Oxford University. So you won't find many clubs in Pall Mall that don't have a portrait of the Duke prominently displayed. Very important fellow. Okay. Picture of Sir Charles Barry, who designed it. We'll whiz over some of these slides because I know that time we did start a bit late, and that's really a sort of schematic drawing of the Travellers. It's a beautiful club when you look at it. These are all rooms that Powell would have really enjoyed and appreciated. And of course, you've got to realise that Powell, we'll see that these things mattered to him. This acceptance into what was a very conservative with a small c, the heart of the British establishment. The Travellers is certainly with the Reform Club, the Athenaeum, I would say the very heart of Pall Mall clubs. The Parthenaic frieze was actually, it's a plaster cast of Elgin's, Lord Elgin's marbles that he brought back from Greece, and the club appreciated very much this gift, and it's displayed around the wall in the library. These are the other clubs, you know, you can see they're all very much designed in the same style. Anyway, back to Mr. AP and Lady Violet Pakenham. Now, there was a very personal connection with the Travellers, which Anthony Powell probably didn't realise when he was nominated by Mr. Urquhart. He didn't realise that, of course, he would be marrying a daughter, a Pakenham, into the Pakenham family. And you have to remember that Wellington, his wife was Kitty Pakenham. So, you know, it was almost a family affair, if you like. He probably would have, and being an avid genealogist, he would have looked up at that portrait and said, oh yes, that's my great-great-grandfather-in-law. They're looking down on us. Also, Frank Pakenham, Lord Longford, was in the 1930 intake, 1932 intake of the Travellers. Sorry, I've got a bit of a bad cold. Now, the Travellers, it has a bit of a reputation. I think some people, some jokers have called it the Foreign Office canteen. A lot of diplomats, it's near the Foreign Office. Senior mandarins would join the club. The club was very well known for its air of silence and discretion. Of all of the clubs, this is one where you would not want to engage strangers in casual conversation. And therefore, it has gone down in history as the Diogenes Club, fictionalized by Conan Doyle. So I mean, that's an interesting sidelight, really, that this club, partly the discretion is partly because of the membership, not just because of the diplomats, but there are, it is well known, I suppose, as the sort of club which has attracted spies, if you like. You know, the Reform, Guy Burgess was a member of the Reform Club, but other, you know, those Cambridge spies were members of the Travellers. I think perhaps people realise that careless talk really does cost lives. During the Second World War, Lord Portal, who was the head of the Air Force, Royal Air Force, was a member of the Travellers. You wouldn't dare initiate a conversation with him. Now, AP, he wasn't just a member of the Travellers. He was also, I think even before the Travellers, he had joined Pratt's Club. AP joined, he joined the Travellers in 1930. This was after his first novel, Afternoon Men, had been published. He was on the up. I think he saw the value in connections, aristocratic and connections with the publishing world, with power brokers. Even before joining the Travellers, he had earlier joined Pratt's Club, and he remained a member of both up until his death in, what was it now, 2000. You might correct me for that, but yep. Listen, Pratt's Club is a very interesting one, because if Travellers is top drawer, Pratt's Club is even more exclusive. It has a reputation of having more Knights of the Garter than any other club in London. I think it has 4 Knights of the Garter. The club is actually owned by the Duke of Devonshire, and it was the Duke of Beaufort's chief steward was a Mr. Pratt. The club is in 14 Park Place, Mayfair, which I think is quite near the area where Powell used to have a flat in his early years. But it's really a dining club. It's an evening, an after hours dining club, open late at night, serving very simple, basic English food. I think deviled kidneys, peeled prawns, lamb chop, potted shrimps, you know, and all of the waiters there are called George. Apparently, it's just a tradition. But anyway, this is a little scene. The club is in the basement, and it used to be the kitchen, Lord Beaufort's kitchen. But it was bought by Duke of Devonshire in 1937 to preserve it, and it's still in the hands of Duke of Devonshire. Now, Clubland, Dickie Umfraville. Now, Powell himself never wrote an enormous amount about the distinguished clubs of which he was a member. I'm sure discretion prompted this. You know, people wouldn't want to find themselves or their club in the pages of a novel. Now, looking at dance, there's a huge, vast number of louche after-hours drinking clubs, night clubs, jazz clubs, all manner of establishments, and some of them could be pinned down, but I think most of them you'll find are actually an amalgamation of the clubs that Powell would have known. Now, this photograph here is of the 43 Club in 43 Gerrard Street. So it would have been quite near Casanova's Chinese restaurant. But it was owned by one Kate Merrick, the queen of clubs. Kate Merrick is the lady, I don't know if you can, if I have a pen that can point, perhaps it doesn't work that way, I don't know. The rather raddled woman, bottom center. She has something like 3 or 4 daughters, so they all look fairly similar. 2 of them were married off to earls, like one of them was the Earl of Kinnoul. Represented the underbelly of 1920s and 30s London, and the reason why these clubs survived. This one broke the law on would have broken the law on many fronts, was because of the police being under instructions not to embarrass certain members of the aristocracy. There was a back entrance to the 43 Club which led out into a yard Kate was tipped off if the police were about to raid. There was certain money changed hands, and you know, there we are. Clubs also somewhat even more hedonistic than you might imagine. These are scenes perhaps from the 1960s, but the 1930s wouldn't have been that different. Murray's Cabaret Club in Beak Street was founded in 1919. So it went on right the way through the Jazz Age. You just had a table. It was very similar, I think, or a more heterosexual version of Colin Tennant's The Gargoyle Club, which was, again, a rather raffish upper-class dive in Mead Street, Soho. Of interest, but it's outside our period, Christine Keeler and her friend Amanda Rice Davis were employed as hostesses. Moving on, this is the Monsignor Club, jazz club, a preeminent jazz club in the late 1930s, where we have Al Bowley and Roy Fox, the whispering cornetist, Roy Fox and his orchestra. Diners would dine, and it's really Powell's world. You know, I think it's right. Piccadilly, poverty and wealth coexisted. This is one of the famous flower women who sold from Covent Garden, sold their flowers around the edge of the fountain. It comes from my book on Piccadilly, which is like a social history. Back to Powell, the outbreak of the Second World War really it revitalized Clubland. Clubland was okay. A lot of the servants, as in the First World War, went off to fight, but the influx of foreign armies, foreign governments in exile, led to a most bizarre assortment of weird uniforms. I think in this one it's a sketch by I forget the name of the artist. I'm sure that you'll tell me. It's very, very famous. I think it's Osbert Lancaster.
Osbert Lancaster.
Yeah, it's Osbert Lancaster. And this I think shows the United Services Club. Powell himself liked to, when he was in London, parade around in his father's old marine dark blue dress uniform with trousers that buttoned over the instep. So he would have been quite at home among this wonderful selection. But the war did come to Clubland in a rather tragic way. The West End at War, which is a section of my Piccadilly book, shows you one of the night spots. Mostly they were kept open. I think in the early days of the war, theatres and nightclubs were closed, and then as people realized it was a phony war, there was very little danger, they all rushed to reopen. The Café de Paris in Coventry Street, something like 4 stories underground. There was no way a German bomb was going to penetrate, or was there? This is the Ken Snake Hips Johnson and his West Indian Orchestra, who were playing, if you like, at the Cafe Madrid. You know, Powell has fictionalized the Café de Paris as the Café de Madrid, where his friend is killed. The German bombs came down a ventilation shaft, caused mass casualties. A lot of people had the air sucked out of their lungs by the blast. There was a lot of looting, as women's expensive diamond necklaces, gold rings, that sort of thing was stripped off bodies. It just was not a very pleasant place to be. Now, the end of the war, and Clubland is looking, I think, really looking to rebuild itself. The Anthony Powell became, I think he moved out of London in, when was it, 1952, he moved to the Chantry in Frome, but he divided his time between London and Frome. Frome was a sort of, well, the Chantry was a haven of peace where he could write gradually, dance to the music of time in installments. But the Travellers was a place where he could actively socialize, where he was active in the running of the club. He was chairman of the library committee. He from 1949 until 1963, and he was able to update the library. I thought it's rather, need a bit of light, so my window is rather, it faces the sun, so you have to excuse me. Yeah, he revived the tradition of a literary tradition at the Travellers, and he also encouraged people to join. Kingsley Amis, he put Kingsley Amis up for membership of the Travellers. When he stayed in London several nights, he could have stayed at the Travellers. I'm not sure that he did, but clubs like the Travellers had a lot of hotel accommodation, and he would have been a very welcome guest. Now, he also worked at Punch as literary editor. He would have invited his friend Malcolm Muggeridge to dine with him at the Travellers. So the Travellers is a very convenient spot. The Travellers, I think, is changing. Now, this chap here, well, this is Robin McDowell, who was the chairman of the Travellers Club, was a great personal friend of the Powells. And here he is filmed with Lady Violet. Robin McDowell was served with the RAF, but he wrote books on wine and food, and I think both of these would have excited AP's interest. So, you know, that AP as well, of course, in his later years, was a big traveller with Violet. Wilfrid Thesiger, I think he outlives Anthony Powell by a couple of years to become, well, by the 1990s, AP was the father of the Travellers Club. He was the oldest member, and it was a status which, would have brought a lot of acclaim. He was able to donate signed copies of all of his works to the Travellers Library. Likewise, the travel writer Wilfrid Thesiger was also a very famous member of the Travellers Club. Right, I think that more or less concludes the talk. I've probably abbreviated some of it. This is the most recent book that I've published. It came out last September, and I wrote it during lockdown. Gave me something to do at least, Well, I didn't know that West End was ever going to get back on its feet, but it certainly seems that way. It's a companion volume to Palaces of Power, because it deals with the louche clubs, whereas Palaces of Power deals with really the very, very famous staid and accepted gentlemen's clubs. These are details of where you can get these amazing books, but I think I'll take questions, because I was aware that Paul had told me we'll have a quarter of an hour for questions, and I think that's very important. I've probably spoken quite long enough. Do we have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Questions, if anybody wants to ask questions, make comments, then if you can raise your hand using the reactions so that I get you on my screen.
While people are doing that, Keith, can I ask Stephen a question to kick things off?
Yeah, sure.
Who nominated AP to Pratt's? Do you know, Stephen? Because that's a pretty exclusive club to get into.
It is, isn't it? Right. Now, did I put it down in the first instance? I'm afraid I don't know, but I think I could. I might be able to uncover something. I think he joined while he was at Duckworth. It may have been Gerald Duckworth. It could have been.
It could have been Evelyn Waugh.
I was going to say it could have been Evelyn,
because Waugh was a member of Pratt's quite early on, from memory.
Right. In that case, I think Evelyn Waugh, because Evelyn Waugh's writing career, I think, really, does predates Anthony Powell's writing. Certainly his success. He'd written most of his major works before the outbreak of the Second World War. Vile Bodies, Scoop, and leaving the Sword of Honor trilogy probably post-war, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think Evelyn Waugh. Yeah, they were very, very great friends. And of course, there's this Clubland thing. It's a place where you can entertain on neutral ground. You can't say, well, come back to my place and take pot luck. You say, no, just come round to my club. I think in relative terms, it was probably cheaper to be a member of a club than just to take a chance on West End restaurants. And you have to remember, there weren't that many really good West End restaurants like there are today.
Okay, Paula, you're on mute, Paula.
Hi.
Yeah.
Is there any relationship with the Travelers Club in New York, in America?
Good question. I suspect yes. The Travelers Club is affiliated to a lot of clubs worldwide. I don't know the precise details, but I could get my book of the Travellers Club down and maybe look it up in the index. If you give me your email, I could tell you for sure, but I would think 90% certain. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody? Sorry, Paula. Carry on.
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else got questions or comments or Mike Jay's waving his hand.
Hello.
Mike.
Was Anthony Powell a member of the MCC? Do we know?
Golly.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I'm. There is certainly reference somewhere, and I forget exactly where, but there is certainly reference to him being a member of MCC. He never, I think, professed any great interest in cricket, but
Indeed.
I don't know the details, and I've never seen the details, but I suspect he may well have been proposed for MCC by his father.
Yes, that was my suspicion.
But yes, he was for many. I mean, I don't know whether he kept it up, you know, for the whole of his life, but I believe, yes, for some years he was. Now, where have I seen that written? I don't think Powell writes it down himself anywhere, so it's quite likely in somewhere like Michael Barber's biography, because I've known about it for quite some years.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Which had just occurred to me. Yeah, we talk about Powell. His leading character, Kenneth Widmer-Poole, talk about Powell not being rather diffident about involving many of the gentlemen's clubs. Well, certainly his leading protagonist, Widmer-Poole, was allegedly a member of Brooks's, and that's where, you know, Widmer-Poole invites Nick Jenkins to confess all about Mildred Blades and whether he should actually have sex with her before marriage, and whether he should use his name or an alias when signing the hotel register.
Jeff Manley.
Yes, I was interested in the discussion about the Bats Club, because I've just been doing some research on Powell and Malcolm Muggeridge, and it looks like Powell may have put up Muggeridge for membership in the Pratt's Club. And Evelyn Waugh seems to question the bona fides of Muggeridge's membership at some point. But it looks to me like he must have been a member, because he keeps writing to Powell about they're going to Pratt's Club together, and when they get there, they see Evelyn Waugh practically, you know, falling into his soup because he's so drunk. So Powell was getting correspondence from, you know, two friends on different sides of this argument. Do you know anything about Muggeridge's history in that vicinity?
Do I know anything about it? No. Other than that, Powell's star was in the ascendant as long as Muggeridge was editor of Punch, but when he left Punch, Powell left shortly after. And I think actually a lot of people regarded Muggeridge as a bit of a bore. You know, I think he was not clubbable, and I think he may have been seen as a bit of a liability. He was certainly not the sort of person that I think he would tend to dominate a conversation rather than be discreet and listen and make polite conversation and fit into a club. I think he was too egocentric for that.
I don't see anywhere where it says that Powell put him up for membership. I was just sort of assuming that because of the
no, I
of the
don't think he did.
correspondence.
As far as I know, he didn't put him up for membership of the Travellers. No,
No.
where he did do that with Kingsley Amis.
Oh,
And I think he may have. There may have been other people. Let me see whether I've got somebody else who in the post-war years. No. Well, yeah, probably not. He may have put other people up for membership, but I'm not 100% sure.
Could I just make an observation, Stephen? Just welcome your comment on this. AP often comes across as somebody who was not typically a committee man. I think he was a trustee of the National Portrait Gallery at one point, but said he was mostly silent. But that is balanced, I think, by the fact that he seems to have been active in the affairs of the Travellers.
Yeah, very.
And actually would have had to demonstrate a fair amount of ability in terms of, in its broadest sense, administration and management, to be involved so long in the kind of roles he had at the Travellers. I mean,
yes, he had two roles. Head of the library committee and also the what was the other committee?
The catering,
the house committee, which which is essentially responsible for catering. Yeah. Where his major innovation was to gain members the privilege of having unlimited cups of coffee. One cup of coffee, and they will top up your cup. But I think he had a very, very strong relationship with this Robin McDowell, who was the chairman of the Travellers. And, he did invite him down to the Chantry, and I think may have looked kindly upon Robin McDowell's publishing career and the books that he wrote. What was the book that, Cooking with Wine.
That's right.
And Clubland Cooking. And I think Clubland Cooking, I've seen that book. I think I may even have a copy of it, but it's a very, very good book. Really gives you the sort of top recipes from some of the leading gentlemen's clubs. So I think Powell was, a much more sociable person than normally give him credit for.
Let's not forget too that even if Powell didn't have a lot of innate sort of organizational ability and administrative ability, he would have had to acquire that pretty damn quickly in the army.
Yeah,
I mean, particularly in MIL. I mean, he would have had to have acquired that pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I mean, he was clearly, I say clearly, certainly from, everything one reads by and about Powell, he was clearly very sociable. But the administrative side, he would have had to pick that up, I mean, at Duckworth's and then in the army.
Yeah, Duckworth's, that's, I think, responsible for getting some quite interesting authors. Forget who he signed in the early days, but he did sign some big names. Duckworth, well, including Robert Byron, with his The Station, travelogue about Mount Athos, with one of my favorite books, Duckworth. So,
Okay, any questions from anybody else or comments or?
Can I make another comment? There's one kind of omission that, and it isn't a club, it's really Rosa Lewis and the Cavendish Hotel, which during the war functioned as a kind of de facto club. And in Powell's memoirs, To Keep the Ball Rolling, he talks about going to the Cavendish, you know, in an air raid, and finding Rosa Lewis half sloshed, sitting in her porter's chair with a wreckage of an air raid around her, and announcing him as oh gosh, what was it now? So the name of some Edwardian Bimbash Stewart, I think she calls him. You know, Rosa Lewis was the Edwardian Society hostess, who was a friend of Edward VII, and obviously, you know, calling Powell Bimbash Stewart, you know, but she was running a kind of freelance gambling casino there, and you know, encouraged drunkenness, all kinds of riots.
Yes, there are many stories about the Cavendish Hotel. I mean, one that I think Powell writes about somewhere is, you know, Rosa Lewis was quite adept at sort of picking on some, you know, inoffensive presence and saying, you know, you're paying for champagne all round.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she's a wonderful character. I love.
Jeff, have you got your hand up again?
Oh, yes.
Yes, sorry, yes. Yeah.
I forgot to ask whether you know if Powell was a member of something called the Authors Club, where he frequently met with people like Muggeridge and Hugh Kingsmill, Graham Greene. I guess it's a club over, it's behind the old War Office someplace along
The Authors Club.
Authors Club, and it shares space with something called the Liberal Club, or what it was at that time.
Right, yeah.
No, I don't know.
He may have just been a guest there, you know, invited by these other people, but he did spend a lot of time there in the early post-war years.
Yeah, I think it goes with the territory of being a writer, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You would want to socialize, you want to network with up and coming authors. You know, he was always, I think, feeling that perhaps he was, you know, I think his friendship with Kingsley Amis was his bid to be bracketed not as one of the bright young things, which he was, but as one of the new up and coming authors of the new wave of the 50s and 60s. And of course, you've got that the Death's Head swordsman person,
Ex Trapnell. Yep.
Ex Trapnell, yeah, you know.
Any more questions?
Magazines.
Any more questions from anybody? Keith, can you spot?
No, I've got nobody else on my screen unless anybody's waving their hand that I can't see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's then wrap it up and say thanks to Stephen. My only little anecdote from this is that the Diogenes Club that Conan Doyle invented, of course, was a dig by him, as he was a Reform Club member next door. And the two are in permanent competition. So that was Conan Doyle getting his own back on the atmosphere at the Travellers. So thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody for joining. Our next talk is in May, on May the 18th, and Jeff Manley, if we'll be doing that talk, Jeff, and on Malcolm Muggeridge, Into the Dust Heap and Out Again, another look at Malcolm Muggeridge, who of course was a great pal of AP's for many years, and then they fell out and then kind of got back together to a certain extent. But obviously Jeff will be telling us more about that. That's on Wednesday, the 18th of May. Keith, anything else from you?
Just one quick one from me. There is a virtual Zoom pub meet in lieu of a real London pub meet on this Saturday, 12:30 on Zoom. If you want to have the link and join us for chat and bring your own food and drink, you know, very welcome. Just drop me a note, and I'll be sending the link out on Friday.
Okay, thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
It's good to see everybody virtually on screen. And so I'm sort of saying a hello to lots of familiar faces I can see from overseas as well as the UK.
Absolutely.
And thank you for keeping the Society's diary busy, and look forward to seeing most of you, if not all of you, at our next session in May. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.